The first contact. It was a quiet day on Earth, the kind of peaceful afternoon when everything seemed normal. Little did humanity know, their world was about to be changed forever. Far above, in the cold, empty void of space, something was approaching. It wasn't a meteor, nor a passing satellite. It was a fleet of alien ships. The Zorvans were an advanced alien race from the distant Andromeda galaxy. They had traveled for hundreds of years, crossing light years of dark space to reach a small blue planet they had been observing for centuries, Earth. They had watched from afar, studying its inhabitants, its history, and its technology. To the Zorvans, humans seemed like a primitive species, no different from the countless others they had conquered in the past. They had no reason to believe that humans could pose a real threat. The Zorvans believed they were superior in every way. Their ships were massive, capable of traveling faster than the speed of light. Their weapons could tear through the strongest of defenses with ease. Their technology was far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. To them, Earth was just another planet to be claimed, another world to conquer and add to their growing empire. As the Zorvan fleet entered Earth's orbit, they saw a world of blue oceans, vast green forests, and sprawling cities. To them, it was beautiful, vulnerable, yet full of promise. They had already prepared their landing strategies, deploying fleets to strategic points around the globe. The invasion was set to begin. The first Zorvan ships landed quietly in the dense forests of South America, and soon their forces began to make their way towards cities and military bases. There was no announcement, no declaration of war, just a sudden, overwhelming presence of ships descending from the sky. The humans had no idea what was coming. At first, they believed it was just another satellite malfunction. But when the ships landed, they realized the truth. Earth was under attack. It didn't take long for the governments of Earth to respond. Military forces scrambled to defend their territories, but they were completely unprepared for what they were facing. The Zorvans were far beyond human technology. Their ships shimmered in the air like ghosts, their weapons firing beams of energy that cut through steel like butter. Cities were struck, power grids were disabled, and entire regions of the world were plunged into chaos. Commander Exhilarating, the leader of the Zorvan fleet, watched as his forces moved through Earth's atmosphere with precision. The humans below were panicking. They had no idea how to respond. Exhilarating's fleet moved with purpose, but there was no rush. The humans would fall. It was just a matter of time. In Washington, D.C., the President of the United States and his advisors watched helplessly as the first images of the alien invasion flooded in. The footage was distorted, filled with static, but the message was clear. Alien ships were above their heads, and they weren't here to negotiate. The President made the decision to attempt communication, hoping that some diplomatic solution could be found. A few minutes later, a small patched-together message was broadcasted over every communication channel on Earth. A Zorvan voice, cold and emotionless, spoke directly to the world. "This is Commander Exhilarating of the Zorvan Empire. Your world has been selected for conquest. You will surrender your planet to us, or we will destroy you." The humans, in disbelief, could only stare at the screen. The alien leader's words were chilling. This was not a diplomatic message. There would be no peace talks. This was an ultimatum. Surrender or perish. But as the Zorvans waited for Earth's answer, something strange happened. The humans, despite their shock, didn't fall into despair. They began to organize. The leaders of the world started communicating. The military, despite being overwhelmed, tried to form a defense. It wasn't much, but it was something. Across the world, ordinary people began to fight back. They may have been no match for the Zorvans' advanced weaponry, but they had one thing that the aliens couldn't predict: human determination. The Zorvans had underestimated their enemy. Back in the skies, the Zorvans continued to deploy more ships. It was a show of force, an attempt to intimidate Earth into submission. They believed that humanity, with its scattered forces and outdated technology, would crumble under the pressure. But what the Zorvans didn't know was that humans had something the Zorvans couldn't understand: an unbreakable spirit, a will to fight, and a drive to survive. As the Zorvan ships hovered above, Commander Exhilarating watched the humans rallying beneath him. It was a curious sight. The Zorvans had seen many species in their conquests. Most of them had surrendered quickly, begging for mercy, offering their worlds without a fight. But these humans were different. They were fighting back, even though they were clearly outmatched. It was not the response Exhilarating had expected, and it intrigued him. "What are they doing?" Exhilarating muttered to himself. His fleet was moving forward, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. These humans were not as weak as he had thought, and that thought lingered as he watched Earth's resistance grow stronger. The fall of the first line of defense. The Zorvans' invasion was swift, their technology a marvel that Earth had never seen before. Cities fell one by one as alien ships hovered above, firing beams of energy that tore apart buildings and sent shockwaves through the streets. The humans, caught off guard, fought back with everything they had, but they were unprepared for such an advanced enemy. In the heart of New York City, chaos reigned. The skyline was lit up with explosions, and the once bustling streets were now filled with the sounds of sirens, screams, and gunfire. The military had responded quickly, but it was clear that they were outmatched. The Zorvans' weaponry made short work of human defenses. "General, they've breached our outer defenses," a young soldier shouted over the radio. He sounded panicked as he looked up at the sky, watching the alien ships unleash their destructive power. General Rachel Turner, a seasoned veteran who had seen her fair share of battles, was calm but resolute. She knew the fate of Earth rested on their ability to organize and fight back, even against impossible odds. "We need to regroup now," she commanded, as she directed her troops to fall back to a secondary defense point. But even as she gave orders, she knew it might be too late. The Zorvans were relentless, and their forces were overwhelming. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet, in a military command center in Moscow, the global leaders were holding a tense meeting. Satellite images flashed on screens, showing the Zorvans' progress as they tore through Earth's defenses. The planet was under siege, and there was no telling how much time humanity had left. President Harrison Cole stood before the room of advisors, his face grim as he reviewed the latest reports. "We can't keep this up for much longer," one of the advisors said, his voice shaky. "Their ships are too powerful. Our air forces are being wiped out in seconds." "I know," President Cole replied, his eyes scanning the map of Earth's military positions. "But we can't surrender. Not yet. We need to buy more time. The resistance needs to form." General Turner's voice crackled through the comms. "We've retreated to secondary positions, but it's not enough. The Zorvans are overwhelming us. We need reinforcements, or we'll lose the city in hours." Cole's hands gripped the sides of the table. "Do whatever you can to hold them back, General. We need to buy time for the civilians to evacuate." On the ground, the humans had not surrendered, but they were being pushed to their breaking point. The military's first line of defense had been shattered, and as the Zorvans advanced, their forces began to scatter. Entire battalions were cut down by energy blasts, their tanks and fighter jets falling apart in the face of alien firepower. As the chaos unfolded, a group of civilians in New York City managed to band together in an underground shelter, desperate to survive. Among them was a former Special Forces soldier, Alex Cruz, who had retired years ago, but found himself dragged back into the fight. "We're not done yet," Alex said, trying to rally the civilians around him. "We'll figure this out. We have to." He handed out basic weapons to anyone who could fight and began organizing a small resistance group. They knew they stood no chance against the alien ships above, but they would do whatever they could to resist. In the streets above, the Zorvans' forces continued their relentless attack, but Alex's team had one advantage: knowledge of the city's underground tunnels and structures. Back in space, Commander Exhilarating watched the scenes unfold on his ship's monitor. His face remained cold, emotionless, as he observed the humans' response. To him, they were no more than ants scurrying in panic beneath his foot. "They're putting up a fight," he muttered, tapping his fingers against the console. "But it won't matter. They're already doomed." Exhilarating's ships moved toward their next targets, the major military bases in the heart of Earth's continents. His forces were unstoppable, each ship designed for destruction, each soldier trained for annihilation. The humans had no way to match their power. However, something caught his attention. Despite their overwhelming forces, the humans were beginning to adapt. They were no longer running in fear. They were starting to regroup and fight back. It was small at first, almost insignificant, but it was there. And that disturbed him. "Send a message to the fleet," Exhilarating ordered. "Increase the attack on the remaining military bases. Don't allow them any time to regroup. Finish this quickly." The Zorvans' plan was clear. They were going to crush Earth's defenses completely. No mercy, no second chances. But back on the ground, as the Zorvans pressed forward, a different kind of resistance was taking form. The human spirit, unbroken by the overwhelming odds, was beginning to rise. As more soldiers and civilians fought back, they discovered something incredible. The Zorvans had underestimated them. Humans were resilient. They fought with a determination that no alien had ever encountered before. In New York, Alex Cruz and his small resistance team led a daring attack against a group of Zorvan soldiers in the city's subway tunnels. It was a guerrilla attack, quick and brutal. Alex's group, armed with makeshift weapons and their knowledge of the city's underground, managed to ambush a few of the Zorvan soldiers, taking them down one by one. "It's not much, but it's a start," Alex said, panting heavily. He didn't know how long they could keep this up, but he had a feeling that the Zorvans weren't prepared for the fight they had just started. As the Zorvans continued their invasion, their confidence began to waver. They had underestimated the humans' ability to adapt, to fight back even when all seemed lost. Commander Exhilarating's eyes narrowed as he observed the growing resistance on Earth. The Zorvans were not used to this kind of resistance. To them, it was an anomaly, a dangerous one. And so the battle for Earth raged on, as the humans began to realize that maybe, just maybe, they could turn the tide. The Zorvans were the predators, but the humans were starting to show their true nature. Humanity's hidden strength. The Zorvans, after their initial victories, had underestimated one crucial factor. Humans were unpredictable. While their advanced technology was overwhelming, they hadn't accounted for the human will to survive. The first few days of the invasion had been brutal, with city after city falling to the alien onslaught. But now, something strange was beginning to happen. Despite being outmatched and outgunned, humans were fighting back. In the shattered remains of New York City, resistance cells began to form. Small groups of soldiers, civilians, and even ordinary people, who never thought they would fight in a war, were beginning to organize. They moved like shadows through the ruins, using guerrilla tactics to strike at the alien forces. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Alex Cruz, who had once been a Special Forces soldier, was now leading a group of survivors in the heart of the city. Their resources were limited, their weapons primitive compared to the Zorvans' advanced technology, but they had one thing the aliens lacked: the ability to adapt and improvise. "We don't need to fight them head-on," Alex said to his small group as they gathered in a makeshift hideout in a subway tunnel. "We fight smarter. We hit and run, disrupt their supply lines, and keep them guessing." The humans had learned quickly that they couldn't match the Zorvans' firepower directly. But what they lacked in advanced technology, they made up for with determination, ingenuity, and the element of surprise. It wasn't just about fighting back. It was about surviving long enough to learn more about the aliens' weaknesses. On the other side of the planet, in a small town in Africa, a different kind of resistance was forming. The Zorvans had targeted major military bases, but they hadn't expected such an organized civilian response. Local militia groups and tribal warriors, armed with little more than rifles and homemade explosives, had banded together to take on the invaders. In the dense jungles, far from the alien-controlled cities, the humans fought in ways the Zorvans couldn't anticipate. They used the terrain to their advantage, setting traps, ambushing patrols, and disappearing into the thick foliage before the aliens could respond. It was the perfect environment for humans to unleash their primal instincts, and the Zorvans were growing frustrated. The Zorvan commander, Celerak, observed from his ship as reports of the scattered resistance forces reached him. His fleet had already crushed the major cities and military bases, but these guerrilla fighters were becoming a nuisance. "They are resourceful," Celerak muttered under his breath, "but it won't last. We will burn their cities to the ground if we have to." Celerak had seen this kind of resistance before, insignificant, easily crushed. But what unnerved him was that the humans didn't give up. Every time his forces decimated one group, another would pop up in a different part of the world, organizing, learning, adapting. It was as if the humans had a deep, almost primal survival instinct. As the resistance movements grew, Earth's leaders began to notice something else. The humans, despite being vastly outmatched, were starting to understand the aliens' technology. They had captured some Zorvan weapons and, using their engineering ingenuity, began to reverse engineer them. It wasn't long before humans were able to build crude but effective weapons that could counteract the aliens' technology. In a lab somewhere in Europe, a team of scientists worked tirelessly, taking apart Zorvan tech they had captured from a downed ship. As they analyzed it, they discovered that the Zorvans' weaponry relied on energy sources that, while powerful, had one critical weakness. They needed a constant, stable power supply. "This is our chance," Dr. Sofia Rodriguez, a lead engineer, said as she looked at the power core of a Zorvan plasma cannon. "If we can disrupt their energy source, we can disable their weapons." It was a long shot. The Zorvans were many steps ahead, but humans were never ones to back down from a challenge. Dr. Rodriguez's team worked around the clock, developing makeshift EMP devices to disable alien weaponry. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it gave the humans an edge they desperately needed. Back in New York City, Alex Cruz and his team had a new plan. They would strike the Zorvans' main power station in the heart of the city. If they could disable it, they might be able to delay the aliens' progress long enough to allow the global resistance to regroup. It was a risky move, but Alex knew they had no choice. It was now or never. The team moved under the cover of night, weaving through the wreckage of the city. Their destination was the heart of the alien occupation, the power grid that supplied the Zorvans with energy to fuel their weaponry. If they could take it down, it might cripple the invaders long enough for the rest of humanity to make a stand. As they approached the station, they could see the Zorvans' patrols. The alien soldiers moved in perfect formation, their weapons ready, scanning the area for any signs of resistance. Alex's team had one advantage. They knew the city better than the invaders did. They used the underground tunnels and sewers to sneak closer to their target, avoiding detection. Once inside, Alex planted the EMP device, knowing it was a one-way mission. There was no turning back. The Zorvans would soon realize what they were doing, and when they did, they would come down hard on anyone involved. But for now, the humans had the element of surprise. As the EMP device hummed to life, Alex and his team raced out of the station, narrowly avoiding detection. The countdown began. Within moments, a massive explosion shook the city as the Zorvan power grid went offline, and the lights flickered out. The alien soldiers lost their power, and for the first time since the invasion began, the humans had struck a blow. The Zorvans were stunned. Their advanced technology, their invincible weaponry, suddenly faltered. Commander Celerak watched as the first wave of shock reports came in. The power grid had been disabled, and the weapons were now useless. The humans had done the impossible. "This is not just a nuisance," Celerak said, his tone serious. "This is a threat." The humans had now proven they weren't just prey. They were predators in their own right, and the Zorvans were beginning to realize the full extent of their mistake. The invasion had only just begun, but the Zorvans were beginning to understand that this was no ordinary world they were conquering. Humanity had more fight left in them than they had ever imagined, and with each victory, the humans grew stronger. The tide begins to turn. It was late afternoon when the first major shift in the war occurred. The Zorvans had expected Earth to fall under their might swiftly, but the tide of battle was beginning to show cracks. The humans, though vastly outmatched in terms of technology, had begun to adapt in ways the Zorvans never anticipated. Their resolve had turned from panic into strategy, from desperation into something much more dangerous: hope. Commander Exhilarating sat in the command center of his flagship, staring at the holographic display of Earth below. His fleet hovered above the planet, its ships forming an impenetrable barrier over the cities. The initial reports had been optimistic. Earth's military had been weak, and its defenses were no match for the Zorvans' superior weapons. But now that arrogance was starting to falter. Small, scattered human resistance groups had begun to wage an insurgency, unexpected but persistent. "What is this?" Exhilarating growled, as another report flashed across his console. "They are still fighting back. This makes no sense." The Zorvans were accustomed to swift victories. Most planets they had invaded had surrendered within days, their defenses falling apart quickly. But Earth was different. The humans were learning. They had been underestimated. The small victories, though seemingly insignificant, had begun to add up, and now the humans were becoming an unpredictable force. Exhilarating turned to his subordinates, his face contorted with frustration. "We will crush them. They think they can challenge us. We will show them the full extent of our power." Back on Earth, the turning point was already underway. The successful sabotage of the Zorvan power grid had given the human resistance something they had lacked before: a glimmer of hope. The Zorvans, whose technology was heavily dependent on their energy sources, were momentarily vulnerable. Without power, their weapons couldn't function at full capacity, their shields were down, and their ships couldn't move as freely. This was a gift, the opportunity humanity had been waiting for. The Resistance's fighters, from every corner of the world, mobilized. From New York to the jungles of Africa, the Americas to Asia, the world's scattered insurgents began organizing their attacks with one goal in mind: to capitalize on the Zorvans' weakness and strike hard. In the ruins of New York City, Alex Cruz and his team received the good news. The Zorvans' power was unstable. The EMP strike had worked. It wasn't a full victory yet, but it was enough to ignite a new sense of purpose. "We've got them on the ropes," Alex said, his voice filled with cautious optimism. "We hit them hard while they're down. We can't let them regroup." The team, fueled by adrenaline and hope, began launching ambushes. They knew the Zorvans were coming to regain control, but the humans were ready. Every alleyway and destroyed building became a trap, every shadow an opportunity. They began to strike the aliens' weaker points: small supply depots, vulnerable communications hubs, and alien patrols were attacked, forcing the Zorvans to waste precious resources trying to contain the chaos. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was working. The resistance was growing stronger, and each victory fed the humans' desire to fight back. But while the Resistance's efforts were proving successful on the ground, the real test was in the skies. The Zorvans still controlled the air, their massive ships looming over Earth, sending down waves of destruction. The humans, however, had learned to fight smart. In a secret military base deep underground in Russia, engineers had been working tirelessly to develop a weapon that could stand up to the Zorvan ships. After weeks of reverse engineering Zorvan technology, they had developed a prototype missile that could pierce the alien shields. "Ready for launch," said Captain Elena Vostok, the commander of the mission. "We've only got one shot at this. If we miss, we'll never get another chance." She wasn't wrong. A single missile would be the only hope they had of disabling the massive Zorvan flagship in Earth's orbit. If the missile succeeded, it could bring down the Zorvan's air superiority and change the course of the war. If it failed, Earth's fate would be sealed. The countdown began. Captain Vostok's team moved quickly, launching the missile at the heart of the flagship. As it flew toward the target, the Zorvans scrambled to react. Their shields were strong, but the missile had been designed specifically to bypass them. With a thunderous explosion, the missile struck its mark, sending a shockwave through the Zorvan fleet. It was a direct hit. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then, chaos erupted. The flagship's shields flickered, and parts of the ship exploded in brilliant flashes of blue and white. It was a crippling blow. The Zorvans had underestimated the humans' ability to adapt, to learn from their failures. They had underestimated the strength of human ingenuity. On the ground, as the first signs of success spread, a message was sent across Earth's resistance networks. The Zorvan flagship has been hit. This is our chance. Now, we push back. The humans surged forward. What had once been isolated pockets of resistance now began to form into something greater. A unified front. Earth's cities, though in ruins, became strongholds of defiance. Humans who had never thought of themselves as soldiers now picked up arms and joined the fight. Even in the darkest corners of the planet, the fire of hope was spreading. In New York, Alex Cruz and his team moved through the streets, more determined than ever. The destruction of the Zorvan flagship had changed the game. With their air superiority diminished, the humans now had a fighting chance. Alex looked at his team, their faces hardened but filled with newfound resolve. "We've got a real shot now," he said, clapping a soldier on the back. "But we need to keep moving. The Zorvans won't give up easily." As they moved toward their next objective, the distant sound of explosions echoed in the air. The battle for Earth had entered a new phase. Humanity had taken its first major step toward victory. Commander Exhilarating was pacing back and forth on his ship, his mind racing. The humans had just delivered a devastating blow to his fleet, and for the first time since the invasion began, he was feeling uncertainty. The humans had not surrendered as anticipated. Instead, they were rallying, adapting, and learning faster than any species he had encountered before. "They have proven themselves resourceful," Exhilarating said, staring out into the void of space. "But they will pay for their defiance." Despite his anger, he knew something that troubled him. The humans were not the prey they had once believed them to be. Earth was beginning to show that the Zorvans had a fight on their hands, and it was no longer just about conquest, it was about survival. The war was far from over. But now, the Zorvans were beginning to realize that Earth was not just another weak planet to be conquered. It was a world of predators. And the Zorvans had just awakened the most dangerous one, the human strike back. As the days passed, it became clear that the war was no longer just a series of isolated skirmishes. Earth's resistance had become a united force, and the Zorvans were no longer in control of the situation. The humans, despite their limited resources and initial shock, had proven one undeniable truth. They were not the prey in this conflict. They were the apex predators. The loss of their flagship had shaken the Zorvans to their core. Their once indomitable sense of superiority was now clouded by doubt. Commander Exhilarating, the Zorvan leader, had underestimated the tenacity of the human spirit, and now his forces were struggling to maintain their grip on the planet. In the underground bunkers beneath what had once been the heart of London, resistance leaders gathered to discuss their next move. The global uprising was taking shape faster than anyone had expected. Everywhere, from the icy tundras of Siberia to the deserts of the Middle East, people were rising up to reclaim their world. Among the leaders was Captain Elena Vostok, the woman who had led the strike that destroyed the Zorvan flagship. Her face, though battle-worn, now carried a spark of something new, hope. Humanity had tasted victory, and the taste had only fueled their desire to fight harder. "We've just hit their fleet," Captain Vostok began, addressing the room. Now we hit them where it hurts the most, their infrastructure. We know their power grid is vulnerable. We know they rely on energy more than anything else. We strike their energy sources, their factories, and we cripple them completely." Her words were met with a nod of approval. Everyone in the room knew what needed to be done. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about driving the Zorvans off Earth and reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. Meanwhile, in the desolate wastelands of what was once Beijing, Alex Kruz and his team prepared for their next mission. The war had taken a toll on the survivors. The world was broken, its cities reduced to rubble, but the fire of resistance still burned brightly in their hearts. "We need to hit their supply lines next," Alex said, looking at the battle maps spread out before him. "If we cut off their resources, we force them into a corner. They'll be weaker, more desperate. That's when we finish this." It was a dangerous mission. The Zorvans were regrouping, and their patrols were growing more aggressive. But Alex knew it had to be done. The humans had learned how to survive, how to fight back. And now it was time to strike with everything they had. Alex's team had become experts at stealth and strategy. They were the ghosts in the night, slipping past alien defenses, planting explosives and disappearing before the Zorvans could react. Each mission, no matter how small, had a ripple effect. Each success was one step closer to victory. Back in orbit, the Zorvan fleet had suffered a devastating loss. The destruction of their flagship had crippled their command structure, and their remaining ships were now disorganized, their morale shattered. Celerak had been forced to reassess his entire approach. His enemies were not the weaklings he had assumed them to be. The humans were organized, and they had a singular, unshakable goal: to survive. "Prepare the reinforcements," Celerak ordered, his voice cold and calculating. "We will not lose this planet to these creatures." The Zorvans' reinforcements were on the way, and Celerak knew it would be a decisive moment. He couldn't afford to lose again. Earth was too valuable, its resources too rich to abandon. But for the first time since the invasion began, the fate of the war was uncertain. In the heart of Europe, a new kind of weapon had been developed. Human engineers, using Zorvan technology, had created an energy pulse cannon, a device capable of disabling the alien ship's shields from a distance. It was humanity's answer to the Zorvans' superior firepower. Captain Vostok and her team were the first to test the weapon. As they stood in the control room, they felt the weight of what was about to happen. This was the moment that could decide the fate of the war. If the cannon worked, they could disable the Zorvans' entire fleet. The countdown began. The pulse cannon hummed to life, and a bright beam of energy shot into the sky, striking one of the Zorvan ships in orbit. The shields shimmered and flickered before they collapsed entirely, and the ship fell silent. "It's working," Captain Vostok whispered. "We can win this." The Zorvans, already weakened by their earlier losses, now faced an additional threat: an energy weapon capable of disabling their ships. Their once invincible fleet was no longer so invincible. Alex Kruz's team, meanwhile, had infiltrated a Zorvan supply depot located deep in the heart of the alien-controlled zone. They had learned how to strike quickly and efficiently, and their plan was simple: hit fast, get out, and disrupt the Zorvans' ability to resupply. The team moved in under the cover of night, planting explosives on key storage facilities. They worked like a well-oiled machine, each member performing their role with precision. As they made their way out, Alex took one last look at the supply depot, knowing that this single act could hinder the Zorvans for days. "Ready to move," Alex said, signaling his team to retreat. As they disappeared into the shadows, the explosions rang out behind them, lighting up the night sky. The Zorvans were losing control of their operations. They could no longer rely on their superior technology alone. They were being outsmarted by an enemy they had once considered weak. The combined efforts of Earth's resistance, from the sabotage missions to the new weapons being developed, had created a turning point in the war. The Zorvans had begun to realize something they had never anticipated. Earth was not a planet to be conquered. It was a planet of fighters, of survivors. And with each passing day, as the humans regrouped and fought back harder, the Zorvans were beginning to understand the true power of humanity. They had come to Earth to conquer, but instead, they were being hunted. Commander Exhilarating stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching as his forces began to struggle. The humans had proven resilient, their attacks relentless. He clenched his fists in frustration, his eyes burning with anger. "They will pay for this," he muttered. "We will break them." But even as he spoke, a nagging thought gnawed at the back of his mind. The Zorvans had underestimated the humans, and now they were fighting a battle they hadn't prepared for. The predators were no longer the Zorvans, they were the humans, and it was only a matter of time before Earth's warriors hunted them down. As the sun set over the war-torn planet below, one thing became clear: the humans were no longer running. They were ready to take the fight to the Zorvans. And this time, they would not stop until victory was theirs. The final push. The battle for Earth had dragged on for what seemed like an eternity, but now, the resistance was stronger than ever. The Zorvans had underestimated the humans, thinking them weak and easy to defeat. Now, with every day that passed, the humans grew bolder, stronger, and more determined. Commander Exhilarating's confidence in the Zorvan superiority had faltered, replaced by mounting frustration. Earth's resistance forces were no longer a scattered collection of cells. They had become a unified army, a force that knew its enemy, understood its weaknesses, and was ready to strike at the heart of the Zorvan invasion. In the aftermath of the successful destruction of their fleet's flagship, the Zorvans were on the defensive, struggling to hold their position. The humans had learned quickly how to exploit the Zorvans' vulnerabilities, an edge that was growing sharper with each passing day. In the heart of the Resistance Command Center, located beneath the remnants of what was once Washington, D.C., Alex Cruz stood before a map covered in red markers. The Zorvans had made their last stand. Their remaining forces were concentrated around the few key cities they had managed to secure. It was a matter of time before humanity dealt the final blow. But that final blow would require all the resources they had, and more. "We have one chance to end this," Alex said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We've found their central power core. If we can destroy it, they'll lose everything. Their fleet, their remaining forces, their entire infrastructure. It'll all crumble." Captain Elena Vostok, who had become a trusted ally and strategist for Alex, nodded in agreement. "But we can't just march in there and hope for the best. Their forces are still formidable, and their last defenses will be set in place. We'll need to hit them from all angles, force them to divide their attention." The plan was risky, but it was the only one that could work. Alex and Elena had already led multiple successful sabotage missions, weakening the Zorvans' hold on Earth. Now they were preparing for their final assault, one that would decide the fate of their world. Above the Earth, the Zorvan fleet, though diminished, still loomed ominously. Exhilarating had gathered what remained of his forces in a last-ditch effort to maintain his grip on the planet. The destruction of their flagship had been a significant loss, and now the humans were close to striking a blow that would cripple them for good. Exhilarating paced anxiously aboard his flagship, watching as his fleet moved into defensive formation. He knew the humans were preparing for their final assault. He could feel it in the air, an anticipation, an energy that spoke of inevitable victory for the humans. "We cannot afford to lose," Exhilarating said, his voice cold and resolute. "They are weak. They are primitive, but we will break them. The entire planet is within our grasp. Hold your positions." But even as he spoke those words, doubts lingered in his mind. The humans had proven to be far more resourceful than he could have ever imagined. The human ability to adapt, to learn, to fight for survival, was beyond anything he had anticipated. Earth's defenses, once scattered and chaotic, had become a unified front, and now it was only a matter of time before the Zorvans were overrun. The human resistance had learned how to use Zorvan technology against them, turning the tide of the war in ways no one had thought possible. With a carefully coordinated attack, Alex, Alina, and their teams infiltrated the Zorvan command structure. Their mission was clear: infiltrate the central core of the Zorvan's remaining strongholds, disable their final defenses, and cripple the heart of the invasion. The time had come for Earth to reclaim its freedom. As Alex and his team approached their target, an immense underground facility that housed the Zorvan's final power source, they moved with precision and speed. Every step was calculated, every decision weighed for its impact. They knew that this would be the final confrontation. If they succeeded, Earth would be free. If they failed, humanity would be lost forever. "This is it," Alex said, his voice steady, but with a fire of determination behind it. "We either win or die trying." His words hung in the air as the team approached the core. The Zorvans had fortified the area, but they were not prepared for the ferocity and determination of the human resistance. Inside, the walls were lined with alien technology, machines and weapons far beyond anything the humans had ever seen. Yet it was the humans' ingenuity that had turned the tide. They had learned to use the Zorvans' own weapons against them, developing countermeasures to every move the aliens had made. Alina moved quickly, placing explosives on the facility's power generators. Her fingers worked with practiced precision, her mind focused on the task at hand. She glanced back at Alex, giving him a brief nod. The countdown had begun. But just as they prepared to leave, alarms blared throughout the facility. The Zorvans had detected their presence. "We've been compromised," Alina shouted, eyes wide with alarm. "We need to move. Now." The sound of Zorvan soldiers echoed down the hallway. The humans were now trapped. There was no way out. The only option was to finish the job. Back on Earth's surface, the resistance fighters launched their final wave of attacks. The Zorvans had prepared for this moment, but they were spread thin. Earth's forces had attacked from multiple directions, dividing the Zorvans' attention. As the countdown to the power core's destruction continued, the world outside exploded in chaos. Alex and Alina fought their way through the Zorvans, taking down aliens one by one, their movements efficient and deadly. Each step brought them closer to their goal. Each step was one closer to Earth's freedom. "We can't hold them off forever," Alex shouted, his voice strained with the effort. But Alina was already ahead of him, moving with purpose toward the core. "Keep them busy, Alex. I've almost got it." The explosions they had planted were almost ready to detonate. The Zorvans were closing in, but the humans had learned how to turn the tide. They were no longer the hunted. They were the hunters. Back in space, Celerak stared at the surface of Earth, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. He had thought victory was assured. Now he was seeing the inevitable collapse of his entire campaign. The resistance had succeeded in their infiltration, and the countdown to the destruction of the Zorvan's power core was already in motion. "No," Celerak screamed. "We cannot lose. Not to these primitive creatures." But it was too late. As the explosions ripped through the heart of the Zorvan's infrastructure, the remaining Zorvan ships faltered, their systems failing one by one. The power core, the last hope for the Zorvans to maintain their control over Earth, was destroyed. The human resistance had won. Earth was free. In the aftermath of the destruction, as the last of the Zorvans fled the planet, Alex Kruz stood with his team, staring at the sky. The battle had been long and costly, but humanity had emerged victorious. "We did it," Alina said, a rare smile breaking across her face. "We did," Alex replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. "But this is just the beginning. Earth will rebuild, and we'll make sure no one ever underestimates us again." The humans had proven that they were not prey. They were the apex predators, and the Zorvans had learned that lesson the hard way. The war was over, but the story of humanity's victory had only just begun. The price of victory. The dust had barely settled after the final battle, but the echoes of humanity's triumph reverberated across the planet. Earth was free, The Zorvans had been driven off, and the alien threat was no more. Yet victory came at a cost, one that would take years to fully comprehend. The human resistance fighters, battered and scarred, stood on the ruins of what had once been the epicenter of Zorvan control. The skies were no longer filled with alien warships, and the sound of explosions and sirens had faded into the distance. The world was quiet, eerily so, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Alex Kruz, Captain Alina Vostok, and the other survivors of the final assault gathered near the remains of the Zorvan power core. What remained of the alien forces had retreated into space, leaving behind nothing but the wreckage of their once mighty fleet. They had won, but the victory was bittersweet. "We did it," Alex said, his voice thick with exhaustion, yet laced with relief. "We actually did it." Alina, standing beside him, looked out over the vast destruction. The cities, once thriving hubs of human civilization, were now nothing more than ruins. The cost of the war had been staggering. Millions of lives lost, entire regions of the planet laid to waste. Earth's landscape had been forever altered by the alien invasion. Humanity had survived, but the price was heavy. "Yeah, we did," Alina replied, her voice tinged with a sadness that Alex understood all too well. "But look at what we've lost. How many families, how many cities? All gone. We're survivors, but at what cost?" For a moment, they stood in silence, taking in the scene. The world had been irrevocably changed, and even though they had won, the scars of war would remain for generations to come. The human spirit had proven indomitable, but victory came with the understanding that rebuilding would be just as monumental as the battle they had just fought. In the command center, once the nerve center of the resistance, the leaders gathered to discuss the future. The immediate danger was over, but now the real challenge began. Earth was free, but it was a broken world. The rebuilding would require every ounce of strength humanity could muster. "We've pushed the invaders off," Captain Vostok began, addressing the room. "But now we have to face the aftermath. The planet is in ruins, and resources are scarce. Our cities have been decimated, our technology looted or destroyed. It's not just about rebuilding what we had. It's about building something better, something stronger." Alex nodded. "We can't afford to go back to the old ways. We've seen how fragile our civilization was. We can't make the same mistakes again." The room was filled with murmurs of agreement. The victory against the Zorvans had taught humanity a harsh lesson. They couldn't rely on the same systems that had allowed them to be vulnerable. The old world was gone, and they would have to adapt, innovate, and rebuild from the ground up. "We have to take the best parts of what we had," Alina continued, "and leave the rest behind. We can build a society that is stronger, more unified, and more prepared for whatever the future holds. But it won't be easy. It will take time." The leaders began discussing plans for recovery, how to restore communication networks, how to rebuild infrastructure, how to heal the wounds left by the war. They knew it would take years, if not decades, but the first steps had to be taken immediately. Far above Earth, the remnants of the Zorvan fleet drifted into deep space, defeated but not destroyed. Commander Exhilarating, though broken by the loss of his forces, refused to accept defeat. He stared into the stars, knowing that the Zorvans had underestimated humanity. They had learned the hard way that Earth was not a world to be conquered. "They've won this battle," Exhilarating muttered to himself. But the war is far from over. The Zorvans, though they had lost their hold on Earth, were still a powerful force in the galaxy. And though they had fled the planet, their pride would not allow them to forget the humiliating defeat they had suffered at the hands of humanity. Exhilarating's thoughts were filled with a burning desire for revenge. He knew that one day the Zorvans would return, and when they did, they would be ready. But that day was not today. Back on Earth, as the humans celebrated their hard-earned victory, they also began the slow and painful process of healing. Memorials were held for the fallen, and survivors from all walks of life worked together to rebuild their communities. The scars of war ran deep, but the resolve of humanity was stronger. The planet began to heal, but the memories of the conflict, of the destruction, would never fade. Humanity had learned the true cost of survival, and though they had triumphed over the Zorvans, they had also been forced to confront the fragility of their existence. Earth was no longer the same place it had been before the invasion. It was stronger, yes, but it was also wiser. And though the humans had won the battle, the war for their future was far from over. For Alex and Alina, the road ahead was uncertain. They had led the charge, fought in the front lines, and emerged victorious. But now, they faced a new challenge, one that required them to build, to lead, and to inspire others to rise from the ashes of the old world. "We've survived the worst," Alex said as they looked out over the ruined city, the setting sun casting long shadows on the ground. "But it's not over. It's just beginning." Alina nodded. "We've proven we can fight. Now, we'll prove we can rebuild." And as the first rays of a new dawn broke across the horizon, the people of Earth stood together, united by the trials they had faced and the strength they had found within themselves. The victory was theirs, but the future, though uncertain, was theirs to shape. The Zorvans had come to Earth expecting to conquer a fragile species, but they had learned the hard way that humanity was no longer the prey. They were the apex predators, and they would never be hunted again. The war was over, but the story of humanity's survival, resilience, and strength had only just begun. And the stars, once a distant, cold reminder of their vulnerability, now glimmered above Earth as a symbol of humanity's enduring spirit. They had survived. They had won, and they would never stop fighting to protect their world.